She was lying there on the front porch where she used to blow soap bubbles and wave at squirrels, bleeding out into the wood, her pink stuffed bunny soaked red beneath her trembling hand. My daughter, my disabled daughter, 8 years old, gentle as dawn, with legs that never worked but a heart that always did. And across from her stood Karen, our neighbor, our self-proclaimed HOA enforcer, arm stiff, face pale, still holding the gun. Her voice shook the air as she screamed. It was self-defense. Over and over, like a chant, as if repeating it enough would wash away what she'd done. But I had seen it. We all had. There was no threat, no weapon, no warning. Just a child in a wheelchair and a woman who saw her existence as an inconvenience. The sirens sliced through the silence like a blade. Red and blue danced across the neighborhood lawns, past the identical hedges and HOA-approved flower beds. Officers swarmed the porch. Neighbors peeked from windows, clutching phones, whispering disbelief. I knelt by my daughter, my hands shaking, pressing down on the wound, trying to stop the impossible. Her breaths were shallow. Her eyes, those wide, innocent eyes, searched mine as if asking, why did this happen to me? I couldn't answer her, because there's no reason. Not one that makes sense. Not one that could justify what Karen did. My wife screamed at the officers to arrest her, but they hesitated. Let's get everyone's statement, they said. We have to understand the full context, they said. Karen stood there, still shouting about feeling threatened, about property safety, about how our daughter had been lurking. Lurking? She was on our porch. She lived here. She was playing with sidewalk chalk, drawing butterflies. And now she was bleeding. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a gunshot. This was about everything that led up to it. The months of harassment, the HOA notices about our ramp being a violation of neighborhood aesthetics, the snide comments about our daughter being unpredictable, the constant targeting. And now, Karen had pulled the trigger. And the system, the one we believed would protect us, was hesitating. How does a neighbor go from petty complaints to attempted murder? How does a community built on order and safety ignore the warning signs until it's too late? And more than anything, how did we let this happen right in front of us on our own porch to a child who couldn't even stand up to defend herself? This isn't just a story about one neighborhood gone wrong. It's about what happens when hate hides behind rules, when power gives permission, and when silence becomes complicity. This is the story of the day my daughter was shot, and how the woman who did it tried to call it justice. Our life before all of this was quiet, almost picturesque. We lived in a neat little house nestled on a cul-de-sac in Oak Ridge Meadows, a suburban neighborhood that looked like something pulled out of a real estate dream. White picket fences, symmetrical lawns, tree-lined streets that blushed golden in the fall and shimmered green in the spring. The kind of place where neighbors wave good morning while jogging with their Labradors, where kids leave their bikes on the lawn and no one worries. We moved there because we thought it would be safe. We thought it would be a sanctuary for us, and especially for our daughter, Emily. She was 8 years old and born with a neurological condition that left her unable to walk. She'd been in a wheelchair since she was a toddler, but not once did she let that stop her from seeing the world as a magical place. She had this smile, genuine and soft, like morning sunlight on a cold day, and a heart that overflowed with kindness. She loved butterflies, sidewalk chalk, and baking cookies with her mom. She had a shelf full of stuffed animals, but one was always with her, a bunny named Maple worn around the ears, patched with care. Our life revolved around her, and we liked it that way. I'm an HVAC technician. My wife, Nicole, is a middle school librarian. We weren't rich, but we were content. Every Sunday morning, we'd wheel Emily down the block to the park where she'd feed ducks by the pond. And the neighbors, well, they smiled, they nodded. Some even asked how Emily was doing. It all seemed so decent. But in hindsight, I realize now it was the kind of politeness that floats on the surface, thin, brittle, and easily shattered. There were cracks even then. Little things, subtle signs. The way people glanced at the wheelchair ramp we installed, like it was some kind of eyesore. The tight smiles when we parked too long in front of our own home while unloading her medical equipment. And then there was Karen. Karen lived 2 houses down on the corner lot with the manicured rose bushes and the giant Oak Ridge HOA committee sign staked into her front yard every few months. She always wore her sunglasses, even on cloudy days, and walked with the air of someone who thought she ran the world, or at least the block. At first, she seemed harmless. A little nosy, a little too interested in everyone's business, but not openly rude. She'd make passive comments like, the HOA prefers neutral colored ramps, or have you considered more discreet outdoor lighting? She liked to think of herself as a keeper of the rules, the enforcer of standards. But we brushed it off. It was easier to assume she was just eccentric. We didn't want trouble. Not with her, not with anyone. We just wanted to give Emily a peaceful, loving environment where she could grow up without feeling different or limited. Emily's condition required constant care, physical therapy, occupational therapy. A nurse visited twice a week. Her immune system was fragile, so we kept the house spotless. We built routines, structures, safe spaces. And even with all that, Emily thrived. She learned to paint with her mouth. She read books aloud like she was performing plays. She once told me, "Daddy, even if I can't run, my imagination can fly." That was the kind of child she was, and we were so proud of her. Every little milestone, learning to feed herself, speaking in full sentences, rolling herself up the driveway, was a celebration. Every challenge, fevers, hospital stays, surgeries, was a battle we fought together. We were a team, a family, and no HOA regulation, no neighbor's glare, no whispered comment could break that. But Oak Ridge Meadows wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The HOA had rules for everything: paint colors, flower types, how tall your grass could grow, what kind of blinds you could hang in your windows. There were penalties for leaving your trash bins out too long, fines for using the wrong shade of mulch. At first, we played along. We didn't want to make waves. We painted the mailbox. We trimmed the hedges. We followed the book. But we also started noticing how certain families got warnings more often than others. Families that didn't fit the cookie-cutter image. The ones with single parents, mixed-race couples, immigrant last names. And then there was us, the family with the ramp, the wheelchair, and the bright purple wind chimes Emily loved so much. Still, we tried to stay neutral. Emily was our focus. On Saturdays, we'd have pancake breakfasts in the backyard. Emily loved flipping them herself from her seat at the special kitchen counter we'd modified for her. We taught her to plant herbs in little wooden boxes and how to count stars from the porch swing. It was a good life, full of love, quiet joy, and the warmth of togetherness. Karen would pass by sometimes during these moments, her eyes lingering on us like we were breaking some unwritten rule. Once she walked right up and said, "Kids like her shouldn't be out in this heat. It's dangerous." I bit my tongue. Nicole didn't. She's fine. She's more resilient than you think. Karen smiled thinly and said, "If you say so," then walked away. That was the moment I knew there was something behind her eyes. Something cold. Then came the letters. Folded notes in our mailbox from the HOA. Non-compliant fixture, visible medical ramp. Improper exterior accessory. Children's wind chimes not approved in HOA bylaws. Front porch clutter. Wheelchair lift visible from street. Clutter. That's what they called our daughter's freedom. We appealed. We explained. We sent medical documentation. And yet, the fines kept coming. Karen, of course, denied having any part in it, smiling in community meetings, claiming she was just doing her duty. She even ran for HOA president. Unopposed. Emily began to notice the change. She'd ask, "Why doesn't Miss Karen like me?" We told her some people just didn't understand others who were different. But inside, it ate us alive. Our daughter had done nothing wrong. And still, she was being treated like a problem, like a disruption. The more we pushed back, the more the HOA pushed forward. Citations for lawn furniture. Complaints about noise when Emily laughed too loudly during her online classes. Karen once walked up during one of Emily's therapy sessions on the porch and asked, "How long will these people be here?" It's hard to relax with all this activity. And yet, despite it all, we held on. We stayed kind. We stayed calm. Emily's world was still beautiful. She still drew hearts with chalk on the pavement and wrote, "Be kind" in big, bubbly letters. She still believed people were good. And we tried to protect that belief. We tried so hard. Because we thought that if we just stayed the course, if we just held on a little longer, the hostility would pass. We didn't know it was only beginning. That summer was hot and dry. Emily had just gotten a new medical chair with better support, and she loved being outside. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping lemonade, telling stories. That porch became her safe haven, her tiny kingdom. And then one afternoon, Karen came storming up, furious that Emily had drawn with chalk again. "It stains the sidewalk." "The HOA has rules," she snapped. Nicole stepped in front of her. "It washes away. She's a child." Karen glared at Emily. "Some kids don't belong out here alone. You never know what they'll do." I still remember the look on Emily's face, confused, small, hurt. It was the first time I saw her fear another person. The first time I realized that Karen didn't just dislike us, she despised us. And that's when the illusion shattered. Oak Ridge Meadows wasn't safe. It wasn't kind. It was a place where people like Karen could use rules as weapons, where differences weren't just unwelcome, they were punished. But we didn't leave. We had faith. Faith in the community. Faith in decency. Faith that things would get better. We had no idea they were about to get much, much worse. It started with a letter. A plain, folded notice stuck in our mailbox, no stamp, no HOA header, just a single line written in neat block letters. "Please consider removing the wheelchair ramp. It affects neighborhood property values." No name, no signature, just that. I stood there reading it over and over, stunned by the casual cruelty. Nicole's face darkened the moment she saw it. She crumpled it up, but I kept it. Something told me it wouldn't be the last. And I was right. A week later, another letter came. This time, it was official, an actual HOA violation notice, citing the aesthetic inconsistency of our accessibility ramp. They claimed it hadn't been pre-approved, that the color wasn't in line with the HOA's neutral exterior palette. Never mind that it was beige, clean, and structurally sound. Never mind that it had been there for 2 years without a word. Suddenly, it was a problem. The letter gave us 10 days to submit a modification request or face fines. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, reading that notice while Emily sat beside me, coloring a butterfly. "Is it about the ramp again?" she asked quietly. I looked at her and tried to smile, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. She was old enough to notice the tension now, old enough to understand when people didn't want her there. We submitted the paperwork. We even attached a letter from Emily's doctor explaining that the ramp was a medical necessity. 2 days later, Karen stopped me while I was watering the lawn. She said with that trademark smirk, "There are other neighborhoods with special accommodations. Oak Ridge prides itself on a clean, uniform look." She gestured toward our porch like it was a trash heap. I kept my cool. I said, "My daughter's comfort matters more than your uniformity." Karen laughed, then turned and walked away. But it escalated, faster than we expected. Chalk drawings disappeared overnight. Power washed off our sidewalk. Our trash bins were mysteriously overturned twice in 1 week. The therapy nurse was confronted in the driveway by Karen, who demanded to see her work credentials. Then came the loud confrontations. It was a Thursday afternoon. Emily was on the porch, drawing with her chalks, writing, "You are loved" in pink and yellow. I was inside on the phone, and suddenly I heard shouting. I ran out and found Karen standing at the edge of our lawn, red-faced and furious, screaming at Emily. "You can't do that here. The sidewalk is public. That chalk is a stain," she yelled, pointing a finger like a judge passing sentence. Emily froze. She clutched her bunny and backed her chair away, as if she'd done something terrible. I ran outside, heart pounding. "What the hell are you doing yelling at a child?" I said, standing between them. Karen crossed her arms. "If she wants to play, do it in your backyard. We all have to follow rules here." I was shaking with rage. You don't yell at my daughter. Ever. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA that night. Nicole sent photos of the chalk, of Karen shouting, of the crumpled letters. We had video footage too, from our ring cam. We felt sure it would be enough. That the HOA would finally see what was happening. That anyone would say, "This is wrong," but they didn't. The HOA board responded with a generic, soulless email. After review of the incident, we find no conclusive evidence of harassment or misconduct. Both parties are reminded to treat each other with respect and adhere to community standards. That was it. No apology. No consequences. No action. When I read the message aloud, Nicole slammed her laptop shut. "They're protecting her," she said, trembling. "They don't care. Not about us. Not about Emily." And that night, for the first time, our daughter asked to stay inside. "I don't want to go on the porch today," she whispered next morning. "What if she's there again?" Her little voice was cracked with fear, and that shattered us in a way I can't describe. Our porch had been her sanctuary. Now it felt like a war zone. Still, we stood our ground. We kept the ramp. We kept the wind chimes. We even let Emily draw again, though we kept a closer eye. We knew what we were risking, but we weren't going to raise our daughter to be afraid of existing, of being visible, of needing support. We weren't going to teach her to shrink because someone else decided she took up too much space. Karen could file complaints. The HOA could ignore our voices. But we weren't going anywhere. We didn't know it yet, but that day on the porch, that moment when Karen screamed at our daughter and the HOA chose silence, was the beginning of everything. The moment the line was crossed, the moment a community chose rules over child safety. That was when the story stopped being about chalk and ramps and became something far darker. From that day on, everything began to unravel. Not quickly, not loudly, but slowly, like a crack in a wall spreading inch by inch until the whole structure collapses. The line had been crossed, but instead of things getting better, they got worse. Much worse. Karen didn't just return to her passive-aggressive comments or anonymous notes. She transformed her campaign against us into something obsessive, something personal. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were her target. And the HOA? They stood by like referees who'd already picked a side before the game even began. It started with the citations. First, we were fined $75 for a non-regulation porch accessory, our wind chimes. Then $100 for excessive sidewalk markings, chalk drawings that Emily barely had the strength to make anymore. Nicole called it what it was, systematic harassment. But when we questioned it, the HOA replied with emotionless form letters and bolded regulations. It became clear that Karen's word carried more weight than any evidence we could provide. And the deeper we pushed back, the harder she retaliated. One morning, we woke to find our mailbox smashed in. A police report was filed, but no witnesses, no fingerprints, no resolution. The officer shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "Could have been teens," he said, but it wasn't teens. It was deliberate, and we knew it. Then came the camera. Karen installed a massive motion-detecting security camera on her porch, angled directly at ours. She claimed it was for safety, but we knew what it really was: surveillance. She watched us constantly. Emily became afraid to step outside. "She's recording me," she whispered one day, her tiny hands gripping her bunny. "Why is she always watching me, Daddy?" And I didn't have the words to tell her. Nicole was furious. She marched to Karen's door and demanded that she move the camera away from our property. Karen didn't even answer the door. Instead, we got a notice from the HOA. 2 days later, hostile confrontation reported. Members are reminded to avoid threatening interactions. That's when we realized Karen wasn't just using the HOA, she was the HOA. Her influence was everywhere. Meetings became hostile. Neighbors who once waved politely now avoided eye contact. A few quietly told us they were on our side, but didn't want to get involved. "She's got connections," they whispered. "You don't want to make her mad." But we were already past that point. We were mad. We were heartbroken. And we were tired. Still, we tried to protect Emily. We focused on joy, Movie nights, backyard picnics, evening bedtime stories under the stars. But even the stars seemed dimmer under Karen's scrutiny. One night, we found pieces of broken glass on our porch steps. Not a random accident, not from a storm. Someone had intentionally left it there. Emily could have rolled over it. It could have shredded her tires, could have caused a fall. That night, Nicole sobbed in the bathroom. "They're trying to break us," she whispered. "They want us gone." And I didn't know what to say because I feared she was right. We reached out to a lawyer's civil rights, HOA law, accessibility statutes. She told us we had a case, but it would be expensive, drawn out, ugly. And during that time, we'd still be living under the same hostile roof, surrounded by the same people who had already shown us they didn't care. But I didn't care anymore about the money or the time. I cared about my daughter's right to be a child, to be safe. We began documenting everything. Every note, every citation, every suspicious incident. We installed our own cameras, filed formal complaints, made noise on social media, and slowly attention started to build. A local reporter reached out, curious about a tweet Nicole posted about ADA violations in HOAs. She came over for coffee, interviewed us, filmed our ramp, filmed Emily playing with chalk. She promised to share our story. That gave us a little hope, but not for long, because Karen saw it, and she didn't like it. Days after the reporter visit, Nicole found a dead squirrel placed deliberately on our welcome mat. No blood, no bite marks, just laid there, stiff and still. A warning. We called the police again. Again, no answers. But that same night, our backyard floodlight stopped working. Emily cried in her room, clutching her bunny, asking if we could move. "Please, Mommy, let's go somewhere where people are nice." We told her we would. We told her it would all be okay. But I could feel the weight of that lie pressing on my chest. Then came the HOA meeting, the one where Karen stood up and proposed a new community conduct clause aimed at discouraging disruptive behaviors and nonconforming modifications. She stared right at us as she read it aloud. No one said a word. They passed it unanimously. We were now officially being legislated into silence. But we didn't back down. We doubled down. Nicole called a local ADA watchdog group. They started digging into Oak Ridge Meadows practices, found out they'd been cited before in 2014 for not accommodating a veteran with a prosthetic limb. It never made the news. The HOA quietly settled. But this time, we were going to make noise. We contacted advocacy groups. A disability rights attorney offered to assist us pro bono. The local news piece aired. For a moment, we felt heard. But Karen's wrath didn't slow down, it escalated. She started patrolling the neighborhood in her car, filming us. She printed photos of Emily's chalk drawings and circulated them to neighbors in manila envelopes labeled community defacement. She even called Child Protective Services, claiming we were neglecting Emily, letting her wander unattended. The caseworker came, stayed for 15 minutes, and left with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "You're clearly amazing parents." But that wasn't the point. The point was that Karen had weaponized the system. She wasn't just trying to inconvenience us. She was trying to destroy us. One evening, I came home late from work to find Nicole standing on the porch, arms crossed, face pale. She was here, she said. She walked right up to Emily while she was drawing and said, "Not every place lets kids like you live here. Some neighborhoods have standards." My stomach dropped. I turned to Emily. Her face was blank, her eyes distant. That's when I knew. She was breaking. Slowly, painfully, Karen was breaking our daughter. And I snapped. I marched to Karen's door. I pounded. She opened. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just said, "This is going to end. You're going to stop harassing my family. My daughter is not your enemy." She stared at me, calm like ice. "Then maybe you should teach her not to trespass on community space with her nonsense," she said. I left before I lost control. But that night, Nicole said it best. She's not going to stop. Not until something irreversible happens. We installed new cameras. We set up alerts. We kept Emily inside more often. It killed us, But what choice did we have? We even started house hunting in nearby counties, wondering if starting over would be easier than fighting an HOA queen who had the town on a leash. But we couldn't afford to move right away. Not with Emily's care. Not with our jobs. So we waited. We braced. And then came the day that changed everything. Emily wanted to sit on the porch again. It was sunny, warm. She had just finished a new drawing of a tree house. She begged to go out. Just for a little bit, Daddy. I'll stay close. I promise. And how could I say no? She deserved normal. She deserved a moment of peace. So I wheeled her out. She smiled in the sun. And for a few minutes, it was perfect. Until Karen came walking down the sidewalk. Until she stopped. Until she reached into her purse. Until she screamed something we couldn't understand, something about safety, and drew a weapon. And before I could move, before I could grab Emily, before I could shout, a gunshot shattered the world. The sound of the gunshot echoed like a scream across the neighborhood, bouncing off stucco walls and manicured hedges, shattering every illusion of safety we'd ever held on to. I remember the split second of silence afterward, just birds startled from trees, my own heartbeat hammering in my ears, and the sickening thud of my daughter's body hitting the wooden porch. Emily slumped over in her chair, blood already pooling beneath her tiny arm. Her stuffed bunny slipped from her lap and landed in the puddle, its once white fur turning red. Nicole's scream tore through the air as I dropped to my knees, hands shaking as I pressed against the wound, yelling for help, for someone, anyone, to call 911. Karen stood at the bottom of the steps, gun still raised, eyes wide, breathing hard like she had just been attacked. She came at me, she shouted. She startled me. I was defending myself. Her voice trembled, not from regret, but from panic, like she'd just realized what she'd done, not because of Emily's suffering, but because she might face consequences. Neighbors began pouring out of their houses. Some ran forward. Some just stood frozen. One of them, thank God, was already on the phone with emergency services. The ambulance came fast. So did the police. Emily was conscious, but barely, her lips whispering something none of us could hear. They lifted her onto the stretcher while I held her hand and promised her over and over that she was going to be okay. Nicole rode with her, clutching her close. I stayed behind because they wouldn't let me go. They said I was a witness. They said I had to answer questions. And as I sat there on the porch, hands covered in my daughter's blood, I watched as Karen was not arrested, not even handcuffed. She stood by her driveway with her lawyer already on the phone. When I asked the officer why she wasn't being taken in, he replied, "She's claiming self-defense. We need to investigate both sides." Self-defense? From a child? From a little girl in a wheelchair holding a piece of chalk? My fists clenched. My voice cracked. She shot a disabled child on her own property. The officer didn't flinch. We have to follow procedure. And that's when the numbness set in. Not just fear, not just grief, but something deeper, betrayal. Emily spent 4 days in the ICU. The bullet tore through her shoulder and grazed a lung. The doctors said it was a miracle she survived. Nicole didn't leave her side once. I sat outside the hospital room, replaying the moment over and over. How I let her go outside. How I trusted the world to be fair. And every time, it ended with that sound, that crack that took away everything. But while Emily fought for her life, we began our own battle. The legal one. I contacted every news outlet that had ever interviewed us. I sent them photos, videos, the security footage, the chalk drawings, the citations, everything. Nicole wrote a post on social media describing the shooting in raw detail. It went viral overnight. Tens of thousands of shares. People were outraged. Strangers sent messages of support. Activists reached out. Journalists called. Our quiet little HOA story became a national headline. Disabled child shot. On her porch. HOA member claims self-defense. The public pressure was too much. The police were forced to reopen the investigation. Karen's gun was confiscated. Her license revoked. And finally, she was arrested, not for attempted murder, but for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. A slap on the wrist compared to what she did, but it was a start. Her mugshot flooded the media. She was fired from her job. Protesters appeared in front of her house. She tried to disappear, but the internet doesn't forget. Still, the HOA remained silent. For days. Then came a carefully worded statement. We regret the incident and are cooperating with authorities. The HOA does not condone violence of any kind. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the months of abuse. But now, people were digging. Reporters found other families who had been quietly driven out by Karen's rulebook reign. Former board members who admitted they were pressured into silence. Whistleblowers came forward. The Oak Ridge Meadows, HOA, became the center of a storm they couldn't control. And this time, they were the ones under surveillance. We sued, not just Karen, but the entire HOA board. We filed under ADA discrimination, harassment, civil negligence, and endangerment. Our lawyer crafted a watertight case. The footage of the shooting, the pattern of targeting, the ignored complaints, it all pointed to systemic abuse hiding behind community rules. In court, Karen's defense tried to paint her as a concerned neighbor who feared for her safety. But the prosecution laid out the truth. They showed Emily's artwork, her wheelchair, the citations, the video, the bullet wound. And in that courtroom, surrounded by reporters, lawyers, and strangers, I held Nicole's hand while our daughter sat quietly beside us, arms still in a sling but head held high. A survivor, a child who refused to disappear. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Karen was found guilty of assault with intent to cause bodily harm. The civil suit continued, and though the HOA tried to distance themselves, they were ordered to pay damages and undergo a full restructure. Their president resigned. Karen faced prison time. Emily's story made headlines across the country. People finally saw the truth. This wasn't a neighbor dispute. This was systemic cruelty disguised as community order. It was what happens when power meets prejudice, when silence becomes complicity, and when people like Karen are allowed to enforce their hate unchecked. We didn't win because of lawyers or press. We won because of truth, because we refused to stay silent, because even when the system tried to bury us, we stood on our porch, our own porch, and said no more. Emily taught us that. She never stopped drawing. Even now, she sketches every day. Her new favorite word? Resilient. After the verdict, after the cameras left, after the crowds thinned and Karen's name was reduced to a headline in someone else's news cycle, we returned to what was left of our life. It wasn't the same. The porch was still stained, both literally and in memory. Emily didn't want to go near it at first. She said it felt haunted, and in a way it was. The ghost of fear still lingered, wrapped in the creak of the wooden floorboards and the hush that followed every sudden noise. But slowly, piece by piece, we began rebuilding. Not just our home, but our hearts. We painted the porch soft yellow, Emily's favorite color. We planted sunflowers along the railing. Nicole found a local artist who helped us create a mural, butterflies, chalk swirls, and the words "You belong here" written in flowing script above the ramp. Emily stood beside it when it was finished, running her fingers across the paint and whispered, "I want other kids to feel safe, too." That was the moment I realized something incredible. Our daughter hadn't just survived, she had transformed. The trauma hadn't erased her innocence. It had carved it into something fiercer, more radiant, something unbreakable. We got her into counseling, someone who specialized in children with disabilities and trauma. She drew through it all, page after page of hope. Nicole went back to work eventually, and I did too, but our lives no longer orbited around quiet routine. Now, everything we did carried purpose. We became voices. Nicole began speaking at disability advocacy conferences. I helped organize neighborhood safety reforms with other families who'd experienced HOA discrimination. Emily became a symbol, a face that others could rally behind. She even got to speak on a televised panel about accessibility and community inclusion. She wore a sparkly pink dress, held her bunny in one hand, and told a national audience, "I'm just a kid who wants to play on her porch without being scared." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And as for Oak Ridge Meadows, it changed. The HOA was dismantled and restructured. Karen's name became synonymous with unchecked power. New laws were passed in our county, ones that mandated disability sensitivity training for all HOA boards, that made it illegal to penalize medical accessibility features without cause. We received settlement money, yes, but more importantly, we received vindication. We got truth, and that is something no amount of money can buy. Every now and then we still get letters from parents, from disabled teens, from strangers who say our story gave them courage, gave them hope, gave them the will to stand up, and that makes everything worth it. Emily still has scars, both visible and invisible, but she also has fire in her eyes. She tells people she wants to be a civil rights lawyer when she grows up, so no one else has to go through what we did, she says, and I believe her, because she is the bravest person I know. Because in the aftermath of tragedy, we didn't just survive. We became stronger, louder, and more united than we ever thought possible. And now, whenever Emily wheels herself out onto that porch, looks up at the sky, and starts drawing again, we know one thing for sure. The world tried to silence her, and she answered with color. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for bearing witness, and for standing with us. What happened to our daughter should never happen to any child anywhere. No family should have to choose between staying silent and staying safe. No child should ever be seen as a nuisance for needing a ramp, or for laughing too loud, or for simply existing differently. What happened on our porch was more than just a tragedy, it was a reflection of what goes wrong when we allow people like Karen to hide their hatred behind policies and rules, when we allow HOAs, institutions, and even neighbors to value aesthetics over humanity. But this story isn't just about Karen. It's about every person who sees injustice and stays silent. It's about every system that protects the abuser instead of the abused. And it's about what happens when we, as a community, refuse to look away. Our daughter didn't choose to be a symbol. She didn't ask to become the face of a fight for fairness. But when her innocence was stolen, when her blood was spilled on her own front porch, she did what few could do. She faced the world unafraid and chose to speak, chose to heal, chose to fight back through kindness, through advocacy, through courage that most adults can only hope to possess. She's still recovering, and in many ways, so are we. But we're using our voices now for every child who's been shamed, for every parent who's been silenced, for every family that's been pushed out because they didn't fit the neighborhood image. And now we ask you to use your voice. Share this video. Leave a comment below. Tell us your story. Tell the world why this matters. Because this isn't just our fight anymore. It belongs to all of us. If you believe children with disabilities deserve safety, if you believe rules should never be used as weapons, if you believe in kindness over control, then help us make sure no one forgets what happened here. Subscribe to our channel HOA Denied Access to follow more real stories like this, stories of people standing up against injustice, fighting for fairness, and demanding change. Because sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest. And if we keep listening, if we keep fighting, we can make our neighborhoods, our laws, and our hearts safer for everyone. From our family to yours, thank you. Stay kind, stay loud, and never, ever let anyone tell you that your child doesn't belong.